All right, I'm going to say a prayer first. Father, just thank you for the book of Daniel. Thank you for the history that is in it. Help me to use the history and what happens to Daniel to show that you're always with us. And in Daniel, when Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego were in the fire, they weren't 100% sure that God was going to deliver them for the flames. And a couple thousand years ago, when Christians were being killed by the Romans in the Colosseum, they weren't sure that God was going to deliver them, and in many cases God did not deliver them. But thank you for the promise, Father, to give us whatever we need and give us ears to listen to this. Be with me, help me to use my words carefully. In Jesus' name, amen. So usually what Jonathan does is he has you take notes while the sermon's going on. We're going to do it differently. As we take a little bit of a break from Romans here, in Daniel, I kind of felt like it was very necessary for you to have some background information, because Daniel does not make sense unless you have a little bit of background information on it first. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some of these notes just kind of together, and then I feel like the sermon that I've prepared for you will make more sense if we've done this together first. So, Sam, you can go to that map up there. Okay, so let's do this here. You don't have to write it down. All right, so in the book of Daniel, you have Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego and a lot of the people who are in Babylonia. So they're not in Israel, they're in Babylonia. And so the book of Daniel, of course, was written from there. So why were they in Babylon in the first place? And of course, when God moves his people, it's usually or often because of judgment. So you can write judgment for number one. They're being punished. They're not on a vacation. They're not on a retreat. They're in Babylon because they're being punished for being disobedient. So the four Israelites, there was thousands of Israelites in Babylon for Babylonian captivity, but the four most famous, and I'm going to use their common names, not their Hebrew names, because I can't pronounce their Hebrew names, but of course it's Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are the four Israelites there. So we're going to talk about this guy a lot in today's sermon, but for three, which Babylonian king brought these to Babylon? It would be Nebuchadnezzar. You can just write Neb if you want. I won't ask you to spell Nebuchadnezzar right. So under what circumstances did Daniel interpret the king's dream? Now, there's a lot of visions and there's a lot of dreams in Daniel. And my original intention was, if you're going to cover the entire book of Daniel, you have this dream and then this dream and then this dream, and it just becomes so... I thought was a better idea was, I feel like Daniel 2, we're going to be in Daniel 2. So you can turn there if you want. I felt like an understanding of Daniel 2 is a good overview of what happens in the book of Daniel. So under what circumstances did Daniel interpret the king's dream? Some of you are thinking about that. So what happens is, and we're going to read this in the Bible, but like I said, I want to give you a little preview first. But Nebuchadnezzar is not a nice man. And he has this dream, and he wants his soothsayers, astrologers, and all his magicians, and all his court of people. He says, I want you to tell me not only what my dream was, but I want you to interpret it for me. And of course, none of them can do it. But one of the Babylonians in desperation says, trying to save his own hide, says, maybe there's somebody else that can. So anyways, so this guy goes to Daniel, and he's telling him the circumstances that all the magicians and all the astrologers and all the wise men, whatever you want to call them, in Babylon are to be executed because they can't interpret the king's dream. And so at that point, Daniel's going to say, okay, I can't interpret the dream, but Daniel goes to prayer, and in prayer, and in a vision, God is going to reveal what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was, and that's what we're going to be reading, and what the interpretation of it is. Okay? And so that's going to be the primary focus of what we're going to do. So in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the four world empires in history that are represented by the statue. So I just feel like if we write these down now, then you'll be able to pay better attention as we're going through Daniel 2. So the first one's going to be Babylonia. King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylonia. The second one's going to be Persia. The third one's going to be Greece. And the fourth one is going to be the Roman Empire. Okay? So we will refer to that when we get there. Okay, so now before we get into Daniel 2, I kind of promised you that you're going to get more out of Daniel if you know a little bit about it. So I promise. I know some of you saw that map and you think, okay, here it comes. This is going to be short, but I feel like it's pretty necessary to have an overview of how they got there. So I want you to look up there for me, please. This is where Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego were. This is Babylonia way over here. So King Nebuchadnezzar is going to come over here. But what I want to do is, I want to give you an overview of what happens before that, just to kind of make sure we're on the same page. So raise your hand if you remember where Abraham was born. Abraham was born right there in Babylonia, the same place that God told him to get out of there. God told Abraham, get out of Babylonia because of all the false gods that they worshiped. So Abraham is going to leave Babylonia, and he stays here for a while, but he eventually is going to be called down into Israel, right there, which was called Canaan at the time. And of course, we all know the story. You know, Abraham is going to doubt God, and he ends up going to Egypt and then coming back. But eventually, for time's sake, but eventually, you know that Abraham's descendants are going to come over to Egypt. And when they came over to Egypt, everything was cool at first, and then there's going to be a Pharaoh that's going to come along, and the Pharaoh's basically going to look at all these Israelites and like, there's too many of these guys. So, of course, the story is he's going to put them into slavery. And when he puts them into slavery, of course, there's going to be a baby born, and that Moses is going to be the baby born into slavery. And, of course, Moses is going to lead them out of slavery back over here. So right in through Israel, and of course Moses dies before he gets there. But in Israel, there we'll call it the glory days of Israel, was of course when King David and King Solomon are going to be there. But when King Solomon, who is David's son, dies, what's going to happen is the kingdom's going to be split in two. Okay? Bad ruler equals kingdom splits up. So the northern kingdom is going to be conquered by the Assyrians who are up here, and the southern kingdom is going to be conquered by the Babylonians. So King Nebuchadnezzar is going to come from here all the way over. He's going to get thousands of people, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel. He's going to steal stuff from the holy vessels that God had Moses make, and he's going to take them all the way back to Babylonia right there, okay? So as we read Daniel, that's what happened before. So go to Daniel 2 for me. And what I know, as I go through this, I really want to be able to comment on some of it, but a lot of it, this is kind of a long reading, so just hang in there. We're going to read Daniel 2. It's going to set stuff up, and then I'm going to use the slideshow to try to teach a little bit further here, okay? So everybody go to Daniel 2. Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. And the king gave commands to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, and tell the king his dreams. So they came and they stood before the king. And the king said to him, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Just tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. Now, do you see why they were kind of desperate to find somebody who could interpret the dream? So, of course, the soothsayers and all those guys, they're not dumb. They're basically going to say, "Oh, we can do this. Just tell us your dream." And then if King Nebuchadnezzar would have told them their dream, they would have made up something to satisfy the king. But the king, even though he's a bad king at this point, he's wise to him. He goes, no. You have to tell me what the dream is. And of course, they're not going to be able to tell him the dream, and they're not going to be able to tell the interpretation of the dream. So this is the most important part. This is where Daniel's going to come in, and he's going to be able to do this for him. So go to 6. Daniel 2:6. However, this is the soothsayers. However, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me. I'm sorry, this is King Nebuchadnezzar, sorry. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there's only one decree for you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there's not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. So gods in plural. The Babylonians, like I said on the map, they worshipped many, many different gods. Isn't that why God told Abraham to get out of there in the first place? So Daniel's going to save their hides, literally. For this reason, the king was angry and furious, and he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon, which would have included, by the way, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and all the other people. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then, with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had come out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. Daniel went in and he asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. So Daniel goes before the king, and so he gets some time here. Then Daniel went to his house, and he made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and his companions. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's their Jewish names, not their Babylonian names, that he might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep secrets. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and you have made it known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known us the king's demand. Not only did he make known the king's demand, but God, by giving him this, is saving the lives of Daniel and everybody else there. So therefore, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went in and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly, they're worried. Remember, they're trying to save their lives here. Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Notice, does Arioch ask Daniel, Are you sure? Somehow, Arioch has enough faith in Daniel from probably what occurred in Daniel 1 that we're not reviewing, that Arioch basically knows Daniel. So he's taking him at his word. He's going to take him before the king. So here's Daniel before the king. So I'm going to read back 25. So 2:25, then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, that's his Babylonian name, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. He has made it known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head when you were upon your bed were this. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass. And after this, and he who reveals secret has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, now this is the part where the picture on your notes that don't get to yet, but so this is the king, that little picture that's on your notes. Daniel's going to tell Nebuchadnezzar, this is the dream, and this is what it means. So this would be the important part. You were watching, O king, and behold, there was a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and they broke them into pieces. Then the iron and the clay and the bronze and the silver and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. So I'm sure Nebuchadnezzar was probably pretty impressed here, right? Nebuchadnezzar was feeling bad. Now Nebuchadnezzar, he heard in there, right, about this. How did you do that, Daniel, right? And so now Daniel's about to blow his mind by basically telling him what the dream means. And as some of you who are familiar with the story are going to be reminded of, is Nebuchadnezzar is going to listen to the dream. However, when Daniel's done giving Nebuchadnezzar the interpretation, Nebuchadnezzar's not exactly going to do what Daniel intended. This is the dream. Now we're on 36. Now I will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you your kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over all of them. You are the head of gold. And probably Nebuchadnezzar's like, wow, that's me. He probably, maybe at this point, he stops paying attention. I don't know. But after this, you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break into pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain with hands, that it had broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel petitioned the king. He set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate. So you can go to the next slide up there. All right, so very important here. Now I know that the version of that you have on your notes is different here, but I'm going to try to explain this here. So if you do a little bit of research into ancient history, just waiting for the laser to start here. If you do a little research on here, the ancient world, there was some empires that dominated, okay? According to Daniel and what he says to Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "You, O king, you're the head of gold." That's what Daniel was probably feeling really good about. Like, wow, I'm the head of gold. The head's the most important part of the body, right? Maybe Nebuchadnezzar got a little obsessed at that point about, wow, I'm the head of gold. But what Daniel's telling him in the dream is that there's going to be some other empires. Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to be gone. There's going to be other empires. So in the dream, he says, there's the chest and the arms right there are a different material. Look at this. The hips down here, the legs, different material, and then there's the feet right there. We know, and Daniel would not have known this from history, because the really cool thing about Daniel is that this is history that hasn't happened yet. The only history that's happened yet is King Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. This history that God told Daniel about has not happened yet. And if you study that history, there was something in history called, who's ever heard of something called the Bronze Age? The Bronze Age? Well, in the Bronze Age, the Greeks were very, very powerful. And so that's why that's going to be bronze right there, okay? So if this is the Babylonians, this is the Persians, okay? This is the Greeks, and this is the Romans. Now, the Greeks had not really become the Greeks at this point in history. If you know anything about history, the Greeks and the Romans are going to dominate that area. Even the Persians are going to dominate the area. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, if you look at how long the Babylonians were in charge, the Babylonian Empire was relatively short, but the Persians are going to last a long time. The Greeks are going to last a long time, and the Romans are going to last a long time. The Romans even had 12 centuries that the Roman Empire actually lasted. But I want to point out the feet in there, and I know that it looks different on your picture there, but if you look carefully at the feet right there, they're partly of clay, partly of iron. The weird part in the dream that you may have picked up on was this weird rock comes out of heaven. It comes out of heaven, comes down, and it hits down here, the feet, and breaks them apart. And the reason they're doing that is because, and by the way, they're iron, just like bronze. A lot of the stuff that they dig up over in Europe that was made by the Greeks is made out of bronze. A lot of the stuff that they dig up in the old Roman Empire was made out of iron. The Romans were very powerful because they used iron for a lot of the things. I don't want to say they invented iron, but they were the first ones that used it to their advantage. But this rock right here is not coming here. It's not going there. It's not going there. It's not going there. It's going right here. So we have to ask ourselves in the dream and in the interpretation that Daniel gave to Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar, if he's even listening at this point, probably thinks, why did the rock break up the feet? And that's kind of interesting. And he says in there that at that time, he's going to set up a kingdom that will have no end. But if you look at the picture, did the Babylonians end? Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. Did the Persians end? The Persians were conquered by the Greeks, right? Now, the Greeks lasted a long time, but they're going to be conquered by the Romans. They're all being conquered. So at the very, very end, when you have this rock coming, hitting those feet, Daniel says one of the most interesting things. He says there's going to be a kingdom set up during that last empire. That kingdom that he's talking about is the Roman Empire. Wasn't Jesus born during the Roman Empire? The whole Christmas story about how Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem, the reason that Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem is because Augustus Caesar, the Roman emperor, wanted a census. Okay? So Jesus' kingdom, Jesus is the king of the Jews. Jesus' kingdom is going to get set up during that last kingdom. And so there's something else very interesting that we're going to try to point out about the history. Go to the next one, Sam. So I know that's not a very good picture right there, but I want to show it to you. Okay, so we started in Europe here. We're getting closer to the end. There's Europe still, but Babylonia would be way over here. Israel's here. Egypt here. But all of this was the Roman Empire. Look, the Roman Empire actually conquered the Egyptians, the Israelites, the Greeks, and they went all the way over here. But notice, there's a split in the kingdom, and in parts of Daniel, what they talk about is this kingdom is going to be split. It's going to be divided, a divided kingdom. And if you know anything about Roman history, Rome is famous for, at one point, the kingdom's going to be split in two. The kingdom's going to be split into the western half, which ended in 476 AD, and the eastern half over here that's going to go on much, 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 much later. So when Daniel wrote these words, God's giving him history that hasn't happened yet. And I know that this didn't mean too much to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar really liked the part about the head of gold. Even Daniel himself, as Daniel's telling the interpretation of this, it is doubtful how much Daniel actually even knew about this kingdom being split at the end there. So if Daniel can see the future, how is it? So this is where you're supposed to think. We all know that God gave Daniel the interpretation. From your notes that you took, how did God give Daniel the interpretation? Well, Daniel prayed before God. And after the prayer, now it is true, isn't he doing this partly to save his own life? Daniel knows that all of the magicians, all the soothsayers, all those people, they're going to be executed unless Daniel can figure out the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. So when Nebuchadnezzar figures out the dream and he tells him, okay, I don't think Daniel it's kind of like when Jesus is talking to the apostles about the parables. In the New Testament, when Jesus is talking to the apostles about the parables and stuff, they're not completely getting it. In my opinion, I don't even think Daniel completely understood this because now they don't say in here, in this specific chapter in Daniel, it doesn't say specifically that it's Persia and Greece in Rome. However, later on in Daniel, it's going to give us some more information. And by the way, interesting to know here that I've told you about Nebuchadnezzar being a very bad king. And we all think, this is just a side note, but, the Bible was written by these holy men and all the, but, the Bible was written by people. I mean, Moses was a murderer, wasn't he? Right? Believe it or not, part of Daniel was actually written by King Nebuchadnezzar. So a Babylonian king, the very king that kidnapped the Israelites and stole the holy vessels that were made in the desert and all that, that very king ends up writing part of Daniel. So God can use anybody to do that. Sam, go to the next one. Okay, so what I want you to do is, actually go to the next one. That's the wrong order. Go to the next one. Okay, so anyway, that's right. What I want to do is I want to tell you something that happens later on in Daniel. Later on in Daniel, what's going to happen is there's going to be another dream. And in that other dream, God's going to give Daniel further information about these kingdoms. And when Daniel gets further information about these kingdoms, later on, Daniel's basically going to be told that there's one of these people is going to be the king of Greece. And in one of these passages in Daniel, what's going to happen is the king of Greece is going to have his empire divided 4 ways. So the Roman Empire gets divided, but the Greek Empire before them was even divided, because what happened was, if you know anything about Alexander the Great, before the Romans, had conquered all these people, and Alexander the Great, at the age of 33, after never losing a battle, had a drunken party, and he ended up dying. And the thing with Alexander was, Alexander the Great didn't have any kids. So the kingdom of Alexander the Great ended up being split into 4. Those 4 kingdoms went to Alexander the Great's 4 generals, okay? Now, I know technically if you look up in a history book, it says Alexander the Great was from Macedonia, but as he conquered the world, he's going in the name of Greece. He's spreading Greek culture all over the place, okay? I want to draw your attention to this here. So, can you see that? So that's Europa right there, okay? Remember the base and all that? But Europa was a Greek goddess that got turned into a Roman goddess. The continent of Europe is actually named after her. Okay? Since the continent of Europe is named after her, it kind of gives you an idea. Everybody thinks that the Babylonians and all that, and the Greeks, that's all ancient history, right? Europe today is a collection of Greek and Roman stuff. And so, I mean, why else would the name of Europe be named after an old Greek and Roman goddess? So I need you to go to Daniel 12 for me, please. I'm going to try to tie this in. Go to Daniel 12, please. So after other dreams, and I'm not going to go through all the dreams. I know the reason, Rachel, you did a good job of putting that song up about the fire, but one of those dreams is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refusing to bow down to a statue. There's other dreams that happen. Even King Nebuchadnezzar is going to have another dream. But in my opinion, to tie all that in, I want you to go to Daniel 12 and go down all the way to 4, please. Daniel 12:4 says this. So after all this, the book of Daniel is almost over here, okay? But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So which book is Daniel being told to shut up? But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book. In my opinion, he's talking about the book of Daniel here, okay? So for thousands of years of church history, Daniel was one of those books that people would kind of avoid because, well, what's it talking about? Now that Now that the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans have come and gone in history, Daniel makes more sense. So when people today look in the book of Daniel, they have a little bit of assistance. What's that book at the end of the Bible that was written later than any of the other books in the Bible? Revelation. So they know that a study of Revelation, that it is always referring back to Daniel. So without Revelation, Daniel doesn't make as much sense. And without Daniel, Revelation doesn't make any sense. So in the future, I've been encouraging Jonathan, when he gets done with Romans, I would really love to see him go through Revelation. And I know other people, maybe not. But I really think that in order to truly understand Daniel, you need to understand Revelation too. Okay, so all right, we started in Europe and we're going to end in Europe. So look up there. All right, so interesting. This will be the conclusion and we'll be done. But this is where all that's happening. Okay. Also in Daniel, what's going to happen is King Nebuchadnezzar, who I spent most of the time on here, King Nebuchadnezzar is eventually going to be gone. There's going to be another king. I believe it was Nebuchadnezzar's son or his grandson. He's going to be the one who does something so horrible. He takes the vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen from Israel, and they drink wine of them, and they have a wild party. And that's going to be it for Babylonia, because the handwriting will be on the wall, and that very night that the handwriting is on the wall, when King Nebuchadnezzar's, I can't remember if it's his son or his grandson, is the king, there's going to be a Persian king that's going to come in, and Cyrus, interesting note also, one of the Old Testament prophets actually names Cyrus before Cyrus was even born. So it's pretty cool that Daniel's able to come up with these names. But there's Persia over here. This is Babylonia. This is Persia. So the Persians came over. They conquered the Babylonians. And the Persians were just as bad as the Babylonians. But one thing about the Persians is they were a little more tolerant of religious stuff. So King Cyrus one of the Persian kings is going to let the Israelites go back to Israel. And when they go back to Israel, they're going to rebuild the temple. So unlike today, where the only thing the Persians are sending over to Israel today are rockets, right? Persia today is Iran. Iran is the one that's sending the missiles over to Hamas and Hezbollah and the other people to kill them. But thousands of years ago, the Persians actually, through the grace of God, God used a horrible king like Nebuchadnezzar. He also used a king. He used Darius. He used Cyrus also. And eventually, those Israelites are going to go back to their land. And it's just interesting today that when people say Persia today, they think of the Persian Gulf. But Persia today is the country of Iran. Let me say a prayer and we'll be done with this. Thank you, Father, for you protecting Israel. We know that you took the Israelites to Babylonia to punish them for being disobedient. And we know that there's lots of other times where the Israelites were disobedient. But we know that after the Persians conquered the Babylonians, that the Israelites were sent back to Israel, not to be obedient, but just to be conquered again later on by other civilizations. And we know that you are continuing to refine Israel. And we know that one day, Father, you're going to come down and you're going to take us. And when you take the Christians, Father, we know that's going to be a time where you are going to deal with Israel. And we know that eventually you're going to make Israel into believers. And we thank you for you being able to see the history, the past of history. And we know about the present, and we know that you can see the future. And since you can see the future, Father, we put our faith in you, and we know that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead. And we also, with that faith we have, that we know that you know the future, that future also has us raising up from the dead and being with Jesus. And we thank you for that promise, and just help us to use the history that's in the Bible to glorify you in Jesus' name.